I'm Catherine Kingsley.
And I'm Catherine Stern.
And this is
Contemplating Culture,
a missionary walk through a secular age. Together we journey through A Secular Age by Charles Taylor, a book looking at the history and philosophy of how the world got where it is, and the impacts of our contemporary culture for us today as missionaries.
And we're inviting you to join the conversation.
Welcome to Contemplating Culture.
Hi everyone.
Welcome back, and this week we are looking at the fourth chapter called Modern Social Imaginaries.
So do we start by explaining what a social imaginary is?
Effectively, a social imaginary is how you and I together imagine what our society is. So what do we think it's about? What do we think holds it together? What's the common ground that we're living in as society? So that's like a little taster for you of what's to come.
So where are we going today?
Today, we're looking at, so where Charles Taylor begins in this chapter is with something called natural law. And he says natural law is the vehicle, I guess, that we shift from a pre-modern social imaginary to the modern social imaginary, and specifically in the area of morality. So how did we shift the common moral ground from where it was to where it is now? And he says the taking off of natural law is one of the things that kind of carried society through that time. Now, natural law is one of the things that I studied at uni, and I found it really interesting. And we're not getting into, I guess, the nitty-gritty of what is natural law today as such. It's a very interesting thing to explore if you have time to kind of do your research. We're not so much looking at, is it true or should we follow it or things like that, but just the role that it played and the way that it's, I guess, still sitting at some level in how we view societies in order that we can understand where society is. So the first character in this movement that Taylor talks about is in the 1600s, a guy called Grotius. And he is looking at political society and saying it should reflect the people that make it up. So he's saying, well, people are rational, people are sociable, people are meant to be living in relationship with each other. So our political system should reflect who we are as people. And so this is kind of like a niche little theory that's sitting there. He's trying to, I guess, just explore reasonably, like, how should our society of politics look, reflecting who we are as people? Is it possible to get there separate from divine intervention of what our society should look like?
So he's picking up something that's actually not really new to thinking. Like if you think about natural law, it goes way back to the Greek philosophers, Aristotle, Plato. Christian thinkers have picked it up along the way and discussed it. You know, Thomas Aquinas situates natural law in God's perfect ordering of the world and writing his law on our hearts, if you like. So now we see this same thing crop up in how do we organise as a political society.
That's it, yeah. And so then in the next little period, maybe 50 years later, this guy Locke emerges, John Locke, and he is now looking at, you know, we're a couple hundred years post the Reformation, and he's looking at there's so many different religious beliefs right across Europe. Is there something that can hold society together, even with all these religious divide? So he then picks it up and says, well, maybe this is why we should be having revolution, to bring about this political society that's going to reflect what we are as people. And so it's this really interesting period where I kind of think of these two guys as just like having a little picnic or something. Like maybe even they weren't, I can't remember if they're contemporaries or not, but just, you know, like this niche elite discussion. But we've talked about this before, when the right person at the right time picks up something and runs with it. And for some reason, that's kind of what happens at this time. This niche little discussion gets picked up and run with. And Taylor says that from these niche origins, it expands on three axes. So it's a three-way expansion that happens at the same time. So the first one is in the number of adherents, that it comes from a niche debate to the masses. The intensity of it, from a theory, just like proposing ideas, to something that now becomes a key part of the social imaginary, and expectations. So something which was justifying the existing system to something that is going to place demands for action.
So really, if we think about it, placing Locke in history, he comes just before the American Revolution, the French Revolution. So we can see that building in adherence, in expectations, in intensity, in the thinkers in those places taking up that idea, spreading it to the masses, and revolution really then defining the political expectations and desires of whole nations that then, the rest of the world is looking at and taking on some of those principles and ideas.
Yeah. That history is kind of carrying this thing to the masses. So before this kind of big shift, Taylor says there was two models of society, I guess, and he calls these like the pre-modern moral order. So one is kind of like that idea of the body, the organism, where all the bits are working together for a higher purpose. There's a higher good that each individual part is working towards. And then that of, I guess, the food chain in nature, like the grass, the rabbit, the fox, the lion, whatever the kind of chain might be. And he kind of says that society was modeled in such a way that was then mirrored in how society worked, that society, human structure was based on nature. So you would have the peasants, the lords, the bishops, the king, that kind of model in the same kind of way. So in that model, everyone's got their burden, but it's almost like it's okay that you're carrying that burden because that's the place where you're meant to be in society. Whereas there's probably people listening that are having reactions to this because we live in a moral order where everyone's an individual, as we've talked about, that I'm not really working towards the higher good, I'm working towards my higher good. So we can see that this is kind of where the shift has happened.
And you can really see that cutting off from the idea of God and religion, and that natural law is just being used to apply to the good of the world as it is, really, can't you? That there was no intention to, at this point, to create a world of individuals. It was to create a just political society that, the higher good was the good of the people.
Yes. And so one of the things that happens in this period is that there's a disengagement of morality from religious belief, because that was how they were going to make society happen, because there were so many different religious beliefs. They needed something that would underpin stability. And so in this attempt to look at the human person and what's the thing that everyone can get to, well, everyone has reason. So everyone can reason from what they can see around them, from what they know of themselves as a human person, can reason to political stability, is this shift from, well, now we don't need the divine law imposed. We don't need supernatural communication to have stability. So it's this idea that the rule for moral conduct is inscribed in our nature, and we can naturally obtain this through reason. This is very much, I guess, the landscape of moral discussion as it emerges. And there's this quote from Blaise Pascal that I think captures something of the thought that's kind of happening in this period of what moral discussion might look like. So he says, when we wish to correct with advantage and to show another that he errs, so when we're having that kind of moral discussion, we must notice from what side he views the matter. For on that side it is usually true, and admit that truth to him, but reveal to him the side on which it is false. He is satisfied with that, for he sees that he was not mistaken, and that he only failed to see all sides. Now no one is offended at not seeing everything, but one does not like to be mistaken. And that perhaps arises from the fact that man naturally cannot see everything, and that naturally he cannot err in the side he looks at, since the perceptions of our senses are always true. People are generally better persuaded by the reasons which they have themselves discovered than by those which have come into the minds of others. And so it's this movement of we can get another person to the right moral place by engaging their reason, rather than imposing something upon them. If we can come aside them, help them see the matter from a rational point of view, and help them see another rational point of view or another rational point of view. Help them keep viewing the thing from different angles until they reach that point themselves. That's, I guess, how moral discussion is happening in this period of time.
So it's essentially like, instead of I don't kill because that's in the Ten Commandments, and God doesn't want me to kill because he said so in the Ten Commandments. I now don't kill because when I'm building from the rational principle of do good, avoid evil, and killing is instinctively understood to be evil by all of us. Therefore, I don't kill because that's against our common morality.
Yeah. And I guess, like, thinking about it, I think this is still very much in how we would view the modern moral landscape. I think people today, when they're having a moral discussion, wholeheartedly are trying to be rational, trying to be justified in what they're bringing forward. But you were making an interesting point earlier that maybe that's not exactly where we are.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about recent debates over various things, even the current one going in politics in Australia about the upcoming referendum. I'm not going to tell you either way what to do, but I listen to people and I hear that people, yes, they think they're driven by reason, but I can hear a lot of emotion sitting under the reason. And I actually think that our postmodern society has moved on from reason alone, and people move based on their feelings, based on what feels good, what feels right, rather than getting tangled up in a whole lot of reasoning. So if it feels good and it feels right, then I find reasons to back me up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like justifying your emotional reaction.
Absolutely. And I think there's something underlying it maybe that's quite important to note, which is that if you look at pure justice, pure reason, it can be quite harsh. You can end up with results that feel wrong at an emotional kind of heart level. And I think that society has, if you like, recognized this, and the pendulum swung, if you like, to no, we've got to listen to our hearts. Love is more important than truth. They might not put it quite that way, but that's essentially what's happening. And so there's a strong movement to, if I feel this is right, if I feel right about this, then this is what I'm going to do, or this is what we should do.
One of the things that I've kind of become aware of is that I meet few young people who are equipped for moral discussion, who either feel equipped or are effective in it. There just seems to be like a toolkit missing, and I wonder if the tools we were given were for a reason-based moral landscape, but there's a nuance that's sitting there now that reason alone doesn't get us there, and if you do try to reason alone, exactly what you're saying, you come across as harsh and people don't want to buy with you, that there's no openness to that kind of straight out reason, even though we think that we're acting rationally. I don't know, there's just like so one of the things I think that I'd love to do today is offer a couple of tools, I guess, for the kit of opening up moral discussion in this landscape. So I give a talk series called Navigating Tricky Terrain, how to engage with the tough topics. And one of the things that I talk about in that series is kind of what that last part of what Blaise Pascal was talking about, that if you try and give someone your reason, they're not going to receive it because it's not theirs. They're far more likely to receive reason that they think is theirs. And so I have this notion of plant seeds, not trees. I don't know if you've ever tried to uproot a tree and plant it somewhere else. Like, it's tricky, and often it won't take. Often, the roots will get destroyed or the new soil won't take it. It's much easier to grow from seed in the location. And I find that this is very true in moral discussion as well, that if you ask the right question or just plant like one new perspective or things like that, that over time that thing will grow within a person. And I might have even mentioned this before, but I know that I've succeeded when someone comes back to me and repeats something that I said to them, but as though it's their new discovery. And it's like, beautiful. It's grown within you, and now you have this tree within yourself. And so I think rather than even outlaying, questioning and asking the right questions and offering the right little insights or little things that, just give a slightly new perspective on something that then over time can be nurtured and nourished is something really key, I think, in these times, because you're never going to do it in a moment. There's never going to be a complete package that's going to do what it is that you're aiming to do.
Yeah, very true. I think you're skipping over a step that's implied in what you're saying, though, and that is the relationship that you have with that person in the first place. My deep conviction in these times is that because people are convinced more by reasons of the heart, that it's love that opens the door to truth, to reason for people. So the reason that you're able to plant those seeds is because you've already established a relationship of trust and love where these people know you as somebody who loves and accepts them and isn't pushing them anywhere, that they know what your beliefs are. They respect potentially that you believe these things. Maybe they're challenged by it. But the thing that matters to them is that they know themselves loved by you, and therefore they're willing to listen to you. And I think our world today is reached by love. I was pondering on, some years ago we had the Year of Mercy.
Mm-hmm. The Mercy Door, I remember
The Mercy Door, yeah. And I was pondering on mercy all year, really. And what I think the big realization that I had was that mercy is above and beyond the natural. That the best we can come to as human beings without God is justice. And as I said before, there's a harshness about pure justice that is completely transcended by mercy. That mercy, I read somewhere, is what makes God other to us. And that we only really know mercy because God reveals it to us. And I think this is what we can give the world. That we don't just know a God who is truth, we know a God who is love, a God who is mercy. And that when we spend time with him and come to know his heart, we're able to give his heart to the world as well as his mind, so that when I have a friend, someone I love who's in a situation that's really messy, I don't cut them off because I can't deal with the mess and the moral decisions they're making that are not decisions that I would make. But I redouble my efforts to be there for them and loving them and supporting them in a way that communicates not just God's love and mercy, I think that's the implied bit, but my own personal love for them as a person, which then leaves the door open in their heart for God and for truth, that when they're in the right place, I can ask a question or they can ask a question and hear my response that will steer their mind towards truth. But they won't get there unless their heart has already been opened to the speaker.
Yeah, and I think one of the things as well that kind of keeps that open within love is, as you were saying, asking questions. Like, for you to stay in the curious state means that their defenses aren't going to go up. Whereas if they get the sense that you're in a locked, firm position and you're not moving, they're more likely to disengage, I think. Like, even if you do have a firm truth that you're holding to, being open to viewing things from their perspective and just trying to see what is the good that they're holding on to, because no one's intentionally choosing what they know to be bad unless there's something else at play. But like most moral decisions, people are trying to work towards good. They're working towards values that they uphold. So chances are they're just viewing that value differently applied in this situation. But I think there's something about us staying open, at least, in that midst as well.
Having that heart of understanding and compassion, acceptance of the person, not necessarily the act, but the person, they're really important, I think, to having any chance to speak God's love into our life.
So we've got a couple of tools there. Plant seeds, not trees. So kind of do that question asking, don't try to do everything in one go. Be on the journey of accompaniment. In that journey, the thing that's going to hold open the door is love. The thing that's going to open up the door is love. And I think that maybe a third tool on the journey is something that Jesus himself does. Like if you look at the way that Jesus does moral discussion, a lot of it's in parable, a lot of it's in story. And you're kind of talking about like witnessing and experiencing that we can't get to some of these moral places just on reason. Like you can't get to mercy on reason, for example. But once you experience it or something witnesses it to you, whether it be an action or a story, and we see both, I think, with Jesus, that he both witnesses with his actions these things that people couldn't have reasoned to, or he gives stories that break what reason would give you, that opens up a possibility, I guess, for a higher morality.
Absolutely. Like when I was learning preaching, one of the things we had very firmly planted in what we were learning was that in order to preach and change someone's heart and reach someone's heart, you need to get past their mind. And the way that you get past their mind is by appealing to their senses, if you like, to their imagination, so that you get directly to their heart. So story is a very natural way of moving past someone's rational mind and engaging with their heart, their experiential space.
That's good. Well, let's call that one appeal to their senses. So we've got plant seeds, not trees. The door is love, and appeal to the senses so that you can reach the heart. So I guess whenever I'm presenting this, I undoubtedly get flooded with questions because as people are listening, they've got a situation in mind that they're thinking of. So for someone like that who might be listening to this kind of discussion of the moral ground and what to do, how to have a discussion with someone who's sitting in a different moral state to you, what can we offer them today, Kat?
Well, I guess I'm assuming now that everybody's now got a situation or a person, at least one of those things in their minds as they're listening. I just want to invite you to bring that person now before God, to lift up to God your heart for that person, your love for that person, your desire for that person to have the fullness of his truth and his love. And when you're ready, to ask God for some wisdom. How is it? What's one way that I can more effectively witness your love into that person's life and situation? Sometimes the wisdom that God gives us is quite challenging. What he asks of us isn't easy. So ask him for the grace, ask him for the extra courage and strength that you're going to need to reach out in that way, to love in that way. And finally, ask him for wisdom. Ask him for that peace of heart that allows you to be open to his spirit, to his prompting, and open to the moment when that person might be open to truth, to just a question or an insight or a story. You don't need to have that ready now, but ask God for an open heart, an open mind, so that you're ready when He's going to give it to you. Amen.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Kat. And I guess that's something you can do over and over again, you know, that we can keep asking God for wisdom, that we are rational creatures, but we are not limited to reason. We also have communication with the divine as an open channel, that He can bring in wisdom that we didn't reach through reason, which is just, a real beautiful gift that we have.
Absolutely. It's one of the gifts of the Spirit. It comes to us in confirmation, right? So it's all available there for all of us.
Beautiful. Well, wishing you well in, I guess, entering into common moral discussion, and I hope it goes well. Thanks, everyone. This has been Contemplating Culture, a podcast produced by the Missionaries of God's Love Sisters. For more information from today's episode, be sure to check out the show notes. We pray that today has blessed you, and most importantly, we invite you to continue the conversation.